Imagine at 6 years old you find a praying mantis. Now, for most of us, we'd probably think, wow, look at that crazy thing. But for today's guest, it was the start of a lifelong journey. In today's episode, Lohit Garikipati joins me, and we talk everything mantis. Again, at 6 years old, he became fascinated with the praying mantis and so much more. He raised them, both native and exotic species, as a hobby back then. But let's fast forward to 2019. He discovers a new species of mantis, the Sonoran tiger mantis. Now take a second and just think about that. Can you imagine how thrilling it would be to discover a new species? Now you get to name it, and of course all that notoriety that comes with it. And we get into that and so much more. Now here's some crazy and fun things about mantis. There's over 2,400 different species. And Lohit, he believes there's going to be more to be discovered. They can fly. They can actually fly. And they are major predators. And the whole time we talked, I'm just thinking, this crazy predator, it should be in some kind of scientific movie. Now they also attack small birds. And that attack, it's actually called a strike. And wait to hear about that. Now, have you heard about that sexual cannibalism thing that they do? Some of it's true, but keep your head on. Pun intended, by the way. We dive deep into that as well. So get ready. This episode's going to strike you. Did you catch it? It's going to totally strike you as fascinating.
For real, for real, for real, for real, for real, for real. For real, for real, for real, for real, for real, for real, for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange. Losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today I've got a real special treat, and I know I'm gonna say it wrong. I've been practicing saying your name forever, but I'm gonna try it. Lohit Garikipati. How's that? Pretty good?
Lohit Garikipati.
Kapati. I know I'm terrible. I told you I was. Anyways, I apologize for that. For you guys listening, this is going to be such a fun one. I got to tell you, I've been doing a lot of recordings this week, and this is one I've been really looking forward to for a lot of reasons. This is such a fascinating subject, and the more I dig into it, the more I'm having fun with it. But first, let's get into you. I want to talk about your journey. Let's go as far back as you want to go, because I think you had this really cool journey, and then we'll get into what we're talking about.
Sure, yeah, let's do it.
You start where you want to start.
All right, go right ahead. All right, yeah. I've pretty much always been interested in mantises for most of my conscious life, I guess. I was generally interested in nature as a kid, in part, I think, because my family and I would go back to India pretty regularly, and my parents, my dad especially, was from a more rural area, and so there's a lot of opportunities to interact with animals and nature. And I really quickly took to being interested about dinosaurs, and I would, read books in the library about them and stuff. But of course, it just so happens that insects are also really common pretty much everywhere you go, and I kind of got interested in all these little organisms that were kind of around me. I initially started keeping ladybugs, actually trying to figure out how to keep them as pets and figure out what their life cycle was like. Took a couple tries, but I eventually got there, and it just so happened that as I kind of completed that kind of experiment, I had found, unbeknownst to me at the time, but I found what was a praying mantis in India at my aunt's house. So I think this is the reaction most people have when they see or interact with the praying mantis the first time, where they're like, this is a really strange animal. It's looking back at me. It's watching me. It's very strange for an insect to be doing something like that. And I thought a lot of those same things. I was about six at the time. And so I saw this animal, thought it was very strange. And completely by coincidence, my teacher the following year had got one of those hatch at home praying mantis kits, and she was giving the extras to students in her class that wanted them. And I instantly, I recognized it was the exact same insect. It's like, okay, I know what this insect is now. So that really pushed me to then start Googling a bunch about praying mantises.
Yeah.
Turns out there's a whole group of people that like to keep mantises as pets to study them in captivity or just for fun. And I kind of joined that community and started working with a variety of different species. And in doing that, I think anyone that's curious about things starts to you just notice things. And I was noticing there's a lot of difference in their behavior and development. And it made me wonder, well, why is this the case? And once I got to my undergraduate institution at UC Davis, I realized a couple of things. One, that there's not a lot of people working on praying mantises, and two, the folks that aren't working on praying mantises but study insects didn't actually know a lot about the praying mantises themselves. And so it was a really kind of interesting opportunity because almost everyone you talk to, even if they're a researcher or not, they know what a praying mantis is, but they'll tell you the one thing that everyone knows about praying mantises, right, is that the female eats the male's head, right? That's like the big fact that people know. But I think there's like a whole world of really interesting behavior and ecology to look into, let alone the evolutionary history of the group, that I kind of wanted to start exploring more during my own research career. And so now I've ended up here doing my PhD at the American Museum of Natural History.
So I'm going to bounce all over the place on this thing. I apologize. It's how my mind thinks. I was thinking when we were talking about that. Obviously, India is part of Asia, but I know, like, isn't it like China or Japan? Don't they keep them like as pets in some kind of weird cultural thing? And I don't mean weird in a bad way. Isn't there some other kind of thing? I'm just thinking about it. Seems like movies I've seen where these guys have their own praying mantis and that. Is there something behind that? And what's the story?
I think in Japan, definitely there's a big insect keeping culture. So there's like stores dedicated to keeping insects, and praying mantises is like a charismatic member of the insect group, or kind of, pretty popular for that
Uh
reason.
huh.
I know there's a pretty big insect hobby in Europe as well. And I think it's much more niche in North America, at least from my
Sure.
experience. I think like it's pretty common to see people working with reptiles and amphibians, and of course, like the furred animals and feathered animals, but insect hobbyists are a little bit more niche in that regard here. So
Okay, so I let's and I'm probably going to bounce back there, so I'm going to apologize now. But
no, no worries.
let's go to the desert and you finding your own little guy. So let's talk about that story. I think it's a really cool story.
Sure. Yeah. So if you imagine 2019, I had just graduated, just finished my last year at Davis, and I had met some friends there who had also finished the entomology program pretty recently, but they were working for the local government as agricultural inspectors, and they were really interested in insect collecting generally. One of my friends, Joel, he would plan these annual trips to Arizona. For folks that don't know, Arizona is fantastic for insects. There is a pretty incredible diversity, which is some might find surprising because it's the desert, but it's the combination of the monsoon season that Arizona has with its geographic proximity to Mexico that you get a really unique mix of insects there. And so I went there. I knew a little bit about the praying mantises there because there was a recently published like Mantises of North America paper. Um, and so I went there, I had no expectations of finding anything, super, super crazy, but I think it's always something that, one hopes to do. And so I found this individual with these really bright golden forelegs. The inside of the forelegs were this really bright golden color, and that really stood out to me as being odd because that kind of bright coloration is typically something that you'd see mentioned in species descriptions or as identification characters. But for the species that I had thought it was or seemed to be, none of the descriptions had mentioned this, and so I thought that was a little bit surprising. And I tried the following years, every time I went, I tried to find more individuals of the species, and just without a lot of luck. And it turns out that the species is incredibly reclusive, and that's part of the reason why it's hard to find. But in 2023, a friend of mine who lives in Arizona sent me a gravid adult female that he'd collected from the field, and it had the same bright reddish orange golden coloration on the inside of the forelegs, and I instantly recognized that it was the exact same species of whatever I'd collected in 2019. So that kind of gave me an opportunity because I'd already had about a bit over 15 years, now almost 20 years in 2026 of keeping mantises, I raised the hatchlings that came from the egg cases that she laid. And so I was able to get this really nice series of documenting the entire development and comparing all of the stages to the species that it supposedly belonged to currently. So it's important to note that like this population had been collected before, so they existed in collections, but because people didn't look that closely and do enough comparison, it was assumed to be another species. And so, in raising them and then actually getting into the nitty gritty of the body and the development, and then the differences in the ecology between the species it was supposed to belong to, the California mantis, I realized it was something totally different. And that I was able to corroborate with additional things like. For folks that don't know, it's pretty common in insect species descriptions to compare the male genitalia so we can see how the parts differ or don't, because you'd think that incompatible genitalia are not able to mate, so that's a biological barrier to reproducing, but all those were different, and so I was able to describe what initially was unknown to me as a new species. So now we have the Sonoran tiger mantis, which is the newest U.S. Mantis species to be described, though I suspect there are many more still, but we'll be getting to that over the next few years.
I think about now, you're not that old to begin with, but you've been studying it for 20 years. And for any person that's a scientist or whatever, to be able to discover a new anything, it's so exciting. And you're so lucky, especially if there's no other ones. Because for everybody that's listening, there's 28 now, I guess. Is that what the number is? Is that a right number?
Right about there for native species, yeah.
That's not a lot. And you having one of the 28 is pretty cool.
Yeah. And to even, it might be even more shocking, just in 2015, that number was more like 16 or 17. So really, a lot of these new species that we have were described fairly recently,
Hmm.
and I think that could probably tell you a lot too about how we've been potentially managing the conservation of some of these animals because we're still learning about what animals in terms of mantises we even have, So
Right.
like the conservation aspect is something that we're going to have to tackle eventually for sure, but. Yeah, we really just need more folks keeping an eye out and documenting the mantises that they see because we need more collections.
So I got a question for you. I'm really lately I've been on this big kick because, anytime I talk to anybody that has a specialty in whatever species, animal or whatever, DNA is playing a big part in everything now. So are you able to do DNA with these guys and then see that they're different by DNA? Is that a thing too now?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's a number of different molecular markers from DNA that we can use to distinguish different species. A lot of it depends on how much funding you have. You might imagine that doing larger scale data sets might cost more because it does.
Sure.
But yeah, it's pretty common to use molecular markers these days. There's some pretty cheap options that are fairly good for species delimitation. And I'm planning on using them, for example, for one of my research projects during my PhD thesis.
Yeah, so in other words, you don't have to look at the genitalia, you can look at the DNA. Is that how that works? Sort of.
Yeah, I mean, ideally you want to use both
Yeah,
because the fact of the matter is, the goal of I think any work that we do, right, is that there's some public utility to it. So one of the reasons why, for example, in my species description, I included a key for people to try and identify members of this group that the new species belongs to, is so that if let's say there's an insect enthusiast that is collecting in Arizona and they collect this mantis and they want to be able to figure out what it is. Well, now there's a resource that they have that can be used for this purpose. So as good as it is to just use molecular data to find these species, we also really need those physical attributes too, because that's what the average everyday person is interacting with, right? Like a hiker is not going to be able to figure out what the DNA of that snake or wasp or whatever it is that they're seeing is right then. But if they have information that the scientist has generated that shows like, hey, this color pattern is actually really helpful.
yeah.
These scale patterns or these scale shapes are really helpful. Then now the average everyday person armed with that knowledge could also figure out what animals are in the area around them.
Yeah, almost use DNA to verify everything else you've seen is basically what you're doing at some level, right?
Yeah, it's like having that second line of evidence to support support your data.
For real, for real, for real, for real, for real, for real.
And we'll be right back.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
Let's do this. Let's talk about some of the different kinds of mantis, because I know there's the orchid one and all the other ones that are really cool. Let's talk about some of the ones. We don't have to talk about all 28 unless you want to. I'm happy with it, but I don't think you want to. Let's talk about some of the more unique ones that, for people that don't know much about it, and let's educate everybody on that.
Sure, yeah. So the US has a pretty nice diversity of praying mantises. Most of the diversity you'll see are in the southern states. Arizona is actually a pretty big hotspot, as is Florida and Texas. But some of the standouts from those include the bark mantises in Florida. So there's a genus there called Gonatista. They're entirely bark dwelling. They live pretty much just like the lichen that you'd see on the wood. That's kind of their color patterning. It's really beautiful. And you'll find them pressed up against pretty much just about any tree. But they are a little bit sneaky, and I guess we can get into this more when if we talk about like how to collect mantises in the first place, if anyone wants to go try that at home. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, they're quite cool. Texas and Arizona are two states that have their own unicorn mantises. So these mantises get their name because they have these really long crests that come out of their head that gives them like a unicorn horn kind of shape.
Sure.
But they mimic like sticks and woody plants that are found in their native ranges. So Arizona has a unicorn species, and Texas has a unicorn species, Pseudovades arizonae and Pseudovades chlorophylla. Those are the two species of unicorn mantises that we have. And then probably the least conspicuous, but most abundant mantis that we have in the US is probably these ground mantises, the Litonutria. They're pretty much anywhere from Texas west. If you imagine like anywhere in the Great Plains west, they exist in all those kind of open habitats. But these guys are incredibly fast, really small. The adults are about an inch long at most. And you'll really find them in like well-preserved natural areas. So they don't really do too well in like urban settings. So you really have to kind of go to like natural preserves, or if you have like nice open rolling hills near your area, you might find some there. But these guys are incredibly speedy. So chances are they'll have darted and be long gone before you before you get close.
Yeah.
And the biggest native species that we have belong to the genus Stagomantis. So these are your more typical looking mantis, I would say. If you think of like the big globular eyes and triangular head, that's kind of what you're thinking about is something like a Stagomantis. There's a couple different species. A lot of people know the Carolina mantis. Those guys are pretty much only in the East Coast, but in the Western US, we have a couple different species. And one way to easily recognize them, for the adults at least, is the females always have short wings. So they're on the order of about 2 inches long, and the females are unable to fly. So they use their wings primarily for defending themselves, and they'll often have bright colors in their hind wings that they'll use to startle aggressors to get them to back off.
So let's talk about flying, because the way I always picture a praying mantis kind of hanging it out and just sitting around until you really know about it. And we can get into the hunting stuff in a while because it's wild.
Yeah.
But let's talk about flying. And the other thing, I know you and I had talked about this. For you guys that listen, we always talk before we record, but tell everybody the difference between a walking stick and a praying mantis, because people get those confused, and I know they're not the same, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so stick insects belong to the order Phasmatodea, and they are entirely herbivorous. So one of the reasons, as you said, that a lot of people mix up the two is because they've evolved a lot of similar camouflage strategies. So sometimes superficially, their body plans will have similar colors or textures or patterns, but that's entirely not to do with relatedness, but to do with selection for that type of body plan for hiding better among the foliage that they're living in.
Right.
So stick insects, you can recognize them because unlike mantises, they do not have triangular large triangular heads with big eyes. They also don't have those spined front legs that mantises have, which we call raptorial forelegs, and they're herbivorous. So they're oftentimes quite lanky and a little bit awkward to as you see them walking, because that's typically not what they do. You can think of them a lot as like the sloths or like the tree cows of the insect world. They're kind of hanging around a
Yeah,
bush or tree that they like to feed on, and they're just eating. That's their job, 24/7. So they typically don't need to actually move all that much, because once you find a nice bush or tree, you're good for a while, until you
right.
strip that thing bare or you get eaten. So mantises, on the other hand, as I mentioned, they have those triangular heads, really big compound eyes, so it's pretty noticeable. They can also rotate their heads almost 180 degrees, so they can actually kind of look behind their shoulder, and they have those spined front legs, which the raptorial forelegs, to capture prey. So they're pretty much entirely predatory.
Well, here's something you said, and this is what gets into the really cool stuff in my mind. So, so we're talking. You call them insects. I call them walking sticks. This is what I've always called them all my life. They're herbivores, and there's a reason why we're going to talk about it now. These praying mantis. These guys, let's just get into some of the stuff. It still blows my mind, and I want you to tell that fish story too. But let's talk about birds, and it blows my mind. These guys are how vicious they can actually be.
Yeah, praying mantises are pretty incredible predators. I mean, you're talking about an animal that isn't using any venom or any kind of chemical compound to subdue their prey. They don't have any particular tools like arachnids do in the form of like webs, right? They are entirely relying on their own strength and the element of surprise to overpower the prey that they're hunting. And even despite that, they are still able to take, as you said, pretty shocking or surprisingly large animals for their size, including like small birds, fish, snakes, frogs. There's a recent paper that was published of them eating snails. So they're dealing with the shell somehow. They can eat toxic prey, like they've been observed feeding on spotted lanternflies or monarch caterpillars, and they don't particularly seem bothered by it. They're able to process the endogenous the toxins found within the body of the prey pretty well, and they can kind of just keep on hunting after that. So they're pretty remarkable predators. Yeah.
Well, first off, they get hummingbirds. They can fly. So first of all, I never realized they could fly. So they can fly. They get hummingbirds. They get small birds. So they get sparrows too. It blows my mind.
I did see a video of a Chinese mantis hunting a red cap finch, I
Yeah,
think was the bird. It's a small kind of sparrow looking bird, but
yeah, yeah.
the bird was, I mean, I was kind of curious, so I looked at the average weight of that bird species, and it's something like 3 times the weight of the mantis. And the mantis just yanks it. Like in the video, you can see the mantis hanging on a tree, and then the bird happens to land nearby it, didn't notice the mantis, I guess, and the mantis grabs it, and when the bird tries to fly off, it just hangs onto the bird until the bird falls down, and then it's just it's just eating it. So
It kind of reminds me of those movies when you watch people jump on the back of a dragon, kind of a thing at some level. It's pretty crazy.
it's I imagine it must have felt a lot like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
it's wild. But tell everybody that fish story you were telling me about the guy that had the pond with all the fish. This is a crazy story. I love this story.
Yeah, yeah. So this was a paper that was published in the late 2010s, and this was the first observation that we formally had of a mantis in the wild fishing. So um, this person in India had a small fish pond in their backyard with some fish in it. It was about 40 fish, and over the course of a bit over a week, a single male mantis, and I emphasize male because the males eat much, much less than the females, but even that singular male ate about a third of the fish in the pond on his own. So he was hunting. Came to the pond, stood on a lily pad, and then waited for the fish to come nearby, and then snatched them
He was
up.
fishing. He wasn't hunting. I mean,
Oh yeah.
that's crazy. I mean, that's wild. So he's sitting on like a lily pad and kind of watching. And I guess they use the front. What are their legs? Like, what do they call their front legs?
Yeah, the raptorial forelegs. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're grabbing it with that, and they're pulling it out of there, and he's munching down on fish. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it's really incredible. And it just kind of goes to show is like, I mean, because these guys are already mantises are already pretty reclusive. So a lot of the times, even seeing this happen one time is really incredible. Let alone seeing it happen several times
Right.
over the course of several days. That's really amazing. Yeah.
So also, let's talk about, because when we first talked, I talked about the walking stick, and you were telling me the story of I think it was in Australia, or whatever, where I asked if the praying mantis, excuse me, actually attack the walking sticks, and they do. So, can you kind of repeat that story? I'm sorry, I love these stories. I could hear it 20 times. I still think it's the best story ever.
Yeah, there's so recently there's a stick insect described from Australia. I believe it's the largest stick insect now currently known. But yeah, this year there was an observation that someone put up on iNaturalist of a giant Australian rainforest mantis just chowing down on this thing like a corn on the cob. Like this is a mantis that's about 4 inches maximum. Eating a stick insect that's something closer to 20 inches. So it's a pretty large size disparity, and the mantis didn't particularly seem to care. So
These guys are vicious, man. Okay. Well, it's not that big. It's only 20 inches. I'll just jump on him and eat him.
yeah, yeah, just 5 times my size, no problem.
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
Let's talk about how long they live. I know they're different sizes in that.
Mm.
I know their eyes have something unique to the animal world and all that too. Let's get into some specifics so people can really understand, basically who they are and what they are, other than eating machines.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that part is pretty much true about all praying mantises is they can eat quite a lot and they do it pretty often and they're quite good at catching the animals to do that. But mantises themselves range from really true generalists where they'll eat pretty much anything that opportunistically comes their way.
Mhm.
And these are the typical species, the generalist species are the ones that people think of when they think of like the praying mantis, like that classic kind of green, lanky, somewhat robust build. Those are like the generalist species to full-on specialists. So there's species that will target specifically ants or butterflies and moths, or like they have a preference for more like flying insects, like orchid mantises. And so when talking about praying mantises, it's important to note that we're talking about a group of animals that is diverse in what they're eating as well. They're not all hunting or participating in the ecosystem the same way. It varies a lot depending on what species we're talking about. So yeah, like I mentioned, there some of these specialist species too are really incredible, both in terms of some of the adaptations that they've had, and we can get into that in a little bit. But there's often a combination of both changes to the body plan and changes to their actual behavior that kind of have to work together in concert for them to be able to specialize on some of their prey.
So I want to talk a lot about a lot of this stuff too, because they do. You're doing some studies on a variety of things, but one of the things, and I didn't realize this, is that in the gardening industry they bring in, and I forget what it's, oculi or whatever the egg thing that gets crystallized for gardens because they eat insects.
Yeah, the Uthika. Yeah.
And I know there's two species now in the U.S. that may be causing a problem. Let's talk a little bit about that. I think it's really interesting, and let's debunk some of the things that people believe they are, because that's some of the studies you're doing, and let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So probably the biggest one, I mean, the biggest one by size is the Chinese mantis. That is a species that was introduced in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it has basically spread all over the East Coast. In part, it's really helped by the fact that their egg cases are offered in garden stores. And so they've now actually reached parts of Western US as well, and urban areas where there's enough kind of moisture for them to just thrive and survive. But these are extremely large mantises. They are somewhere close to 5 inches or so, which is about double the size of any of the native species that you'd find in the same areas. And speaking from personal experience collecting them, they can exist in incredibly high densities. We're talking like hundreds of individuals in a plot of land. And when you're having a now sudden dominant predator that is entered the ecosystem, oftentimes what happens is smaller, lower trophic, lower predators are lower on the trophic chain. For example, native mantis species that might have been sort of at the top of their respective food chain at the time are now sort of pushed to these mesopredator status. So they're middle predators, they're being predated on as well as preying on other things. But the problem is these large invasive species like the Chinese mantis and the European mantis, they are able to basically outcompete a lot of the native species for a couple of reasons. One is that they are larger, so they have the inherent size advantage. The second part is, unlike a lot of the native species here, there aren't parasites that target the egg cases. So they can reproduce pretty much unhampered by anything else besides the availability of prey and the space available in the area that they're in. So they don't have the same kind of pressures that the native species do. So in that front, in a lot of places, they've really been successful at arriving and just sort of taking over the habitat. Part of the issue is there are so few people that are actively working on praying mantises and their impacts that for basically since they arrived, they were basically allowed to be intentionally spread and are actually marketed as great pest control for your
Right.
garden. But of course, these are one of those generalist species, right? So they're going to eat basically whatever they can opportunistically catch, whether it's monarch butterflies or hummingbirds or pollinating native bees. And it just so happens that you might see it eating some flies and like grasshoppers that may be going after your garden, but they're also going to be eating all the other stuff. So they're really not that great
Yeah.
pest control anyway. And then that's not even factoring in the damage to like the native mantises, like I mentioned, or the variety of vertebrates that they can eat because of their size that native mantis species cannot. So yeah, one of the big things I try to emphasize to people is I guarantee you there is not a single state in the US that doesn't have a native mantis species. So if you're looking to get mantises for your yard,
Right.
get a native one that's native to your area and do not help these invasive species spread around any more than they already are.
So is it if they're not belonging there and they're the really they're the predator at that point? Do they are they taking things off balance a little bit because of that? Because of the natural environment?
Yeah, there have been just a few studies done on looking specifically at the impacts on particular native species. For example, we know that the Chinese mantises, just the presence of individuals in an area and the fecal matter that they produce actually deters native wolf spiders from foraging in that area. Just the smell
Yeah,
of
they
these animals
stink.
is like changing the way some of these other predators are foraging. And there have been other studies that basically show that when these mantises are in an area, they basically eat so many of the herbivorous insects and other predators in the area that the average plant biomass is increasing in that particular plot of land. So in that sense, they are very helpful for plants, but that's not necessarily great if you're talking about the fact that it's coming at the cost of native organisms that are already there, especially because a lot of these, like they're a lot of these effects could be net neutral, but it's the fact that they're displacing native predators
Right.
from doing their own jobs because they're eating them as well as the prey that those predators would be feeding on.
But they don't eat plants at all, right? Or do they?
No, there have been studies. There has been a study that actually found that Chinese mantises can feed on pollen when they first hatch, and they are actually able to surprisingly develop just off of feeding off of pollen.
Mhm.
But it's not clear whether that's a survival strategy in a lab setting because there was no other option presented, or if that's something that they naturally do. It's very atypical for mantises to eat herbaceous food sources. They are pretty much on the full on the predatory train. So
So, for some young scientists out there, or some old scientist or whatever that wants to, like you did early on, if they want to raise their mantis family or whatever you want to call it, walk me through that, and then how long they live and all that kind of stuff too.
Sure, yeah. So the average praying mantis, I would say, if pick any species out of the 2,500 that are there, most of them live somewhere about a year. It takes about 4 months for most of them to get to adult, depending on temperature and food availability. And then they will be adults for anywhere from 6 to 8 months, with the females being on the 5 to 8 month range, and the males being much shorter lived. And then they will spend some amount of time in their egg case. So for species in the US, that pretty much is always over the winter. So it's about 5 months in the egg case. But for a lot of species in the tropics, it can be as little as 3 weeks. It really depends on the
Oh,
species
wow.
we're talking about. Yeah. So some of the species have incredibly fast generation times, and they can be as fast as hatching to producing the next generation in about 4 months. um, or it can be quite prolonged, where you have some species that are living 2 to 3 years, and that entire time the females are laying egg cases and producing more offspring. So
And how many eggs are typically in an egg case? I mean, how many is it? Tens or hundreds or what is it?
that also varies tremendously. So some species really lay just quite a few, and it can be like 5 to 8 eggs in a single egg case. Um, it's more common for it to be so somewhere between 100 and 200, I would say. That's probably more common.
Wow.
Yeah. Those species that lay those pretty large egg cases with several hundred offspring, they tend to lay fewer egg cases in total. So you might think of it as like there's differences in how many eggs they're putting in a particular basket in a sense. So some species will lay a lot of egg cases with a very few number of eggs per egg case, but then that gives them the opportunity to put them in different places in their environment. So that might give them different offspring better chances of survival. But other species will lay hundreds in one egg case, and in a lot of those species, we also notice that they're much more ready to cannibalize siblings. So that might be part of that. That might be part of that strategy. Yeah.
Let's talk about that cannibalization. Let's talk about everybody knows about eating the head, but I know that it's different than what most people think. Let's talk about that, what the female does. There's one I get humor. I get humor out of some of this stuff, but anyways,
Yeah, it's a really like graphic kind of behavior. So I understand why people tend to focus on that. It's very like wow. When you see it happen, it's like, whoa.
but it's only really so it's not everyone. It's like 30% is the high end, right? Really, what the females do.
Yeah, yeah.
For people that don't know, and even if you know, this is such an interesting part about them too. And I'll tell you the part that I think's funny when you get done. I get humor out of it, at least. I don't know if anybody else will, but I do for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty uncommon, as you were saying. So, I mean, even in species that I would say are pretty aggressive, or like cannibalism is kind of part of their development. In most cases, like it's still about a third of the time, and oftentimes it's because the female is especially hungry. Um, you see dramatically decreased rates of cannibalism when the female's satiated. It pretty much requires the male to be either pretty aggressive in the mating, and like so the female's actually bothered by him, and then in which case I think it's less about killing the mate for resources and more about you're in my territory and you're bothering me, so you're gonna get rid of you this way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's typically quite rare, and I will say also too, like a lot of the challenge um, with these studies, when people are like saying that praying mantises are just kind of indiscriminately cannibalizing their mates and eating their head off every time, it's oftentimes what happens is people are putting mantises together and kind of, I mean, we don't have days to sit and watch these guys
Yeah.
behave naturally. In captivity we're kind of like, all right, I got an afternoon free, let's try to make something happen. So it's a bit of a rush job. But in the wild, the males are really taking days to find the female, because the females are, when they're mature and looking for a mate, they're releasing these pheromones in the air. We call it calling. And so the males will smell this in the area, and they will fly somewhat close until they think they're kind of in the area. And then after that, they're visually locating the female. So they'll be sitting on a bush or a tree or something, and they'll be scanning around for a couple of days, trying to get a little bit closer, because the male also wants to not die. It's beneficial for the male to
Yeah.
try and mate with another female if he can, rather than than die on first attempt, if he's even successful at all. So the males do have quite the self-preservation instinct. I've seen many males will, if the female moves, somewhat aggressively to him, he will absolutely try to run away before the female even gets close. He's like, "Oh, okay, you're not interested. You're going to eat me. I'm out."
Yep,
um,
gotta go.
yeah, exactly. So it's pretty rare, I would say. And then there's species that I would say they don't cannibalize at all as a rule. It's very, very like it's just not heard of for some species. Um, so it's quite a big range of how much the cannibalism occurs, um, for at least in the context of mating. Yeah, I would say but for the folks at home, just the takeaway is it's pretty rare, and I would argue there's a lot more interesting things that they do than just that. So hopefully after this podcast, you'll have some more facts that you can tell people.
Well, two things. One is I read that there's some theory that also when they do eat the head of the male, it's also for nutrients as well to help that too. There's another scientific reason why, other than get away from me, you're driving me crazy kind of thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. You might imagine, like, if you're a mantis mom to be and you have to produce these hundreds of eggs and you're just not getting a lot of food, well, now you have you have your eggs ready to go, but now you also have a food resource, you know?
Yeah,
And actually removing the head or part of the body of the male actually improves sperm transfer. So that's another aspect of this too, where females maybe if they it's not there hasn't been studies on this, but I kind of have a hypothesis that there might be females in some cases that when they're not finding a lot of mates, it might be beneficial to also just decapitate the male anyway, just to make sure you're getting as many fertilized eggs as possible, because you might not find a mate
right.
for the rest of your life in some
Well, one
cases.
of the things I read, and I don't know how, again, I always preface it, I read it on the internet, so I don't know what's true or not true, but it said that oftentimes when they bite the head off, the sex keeps going on, and sometimes it's more violent than, or better, I guess, or whatever word you want to use for that term. Being cautious of what I'm saying on here. But apparently the male keeps going, whatever going is in the mantis world.
They can stay mating, and sometimes these species are mating for over a day. Even like I've had pairs in captivity that they were basically mating for a bit over 24 hours.
Wow.
Sometimes it's as short as like 3 4 hours, but I'd say more typically for most of the species, it's somewhere on the order of like 6 to 12 hours is pretty common. So it's a pretty extended period of time. And during this time, the female is basically responsible for the both of them. So she has to carry him around and protect the both of them from potential predators and keep an eye out, because once the male is mating, he's basically got his face tucked against her back and hoping that she doesn't decide that she's hungry enough that she needs to eat him. That's kind of
Right.
yeah. So
I want to add to that. I read this thing on there that some of the males know that the females they kind of sneak up behind too. They kind of go, okay, I'm not getting my head bit off. I can kind of sneak up there.
yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah. Males absolutely will be quite cautious in their approach sometimes, and they will basically mantises have two kind of ways that males might engage with the female. Is one is like they might go for like an ambush approach where they're trying not to be detected by the female, and then they use secondary communication like tapping her with his antenna after he mounts, or using his forelegs to like tap her wings to let her know that, hey, I'm a mate, I'm not food. But some males also do visual displays, and they're really beautiful types of communication where they have these bright colors that they'll flash to the female to let the female know, like, I'm interested in mating. And then if the female's interested, usually there's some kind of signal back, and then the male knows, like, okay, it's safe to go for it now. She's not, yeah, she wants to mate and not eat me, so it's good.
So you got to tell the males keep your head in this deal. The ones-
Exactly. Yes, literally.
I
Yeah.
know. So I want to go back a little bit for people listening. So I'm let's just use me. I want to get some. I'm going to raise some mantis, and I've got it. I'm assuming they do it in like terrariums. Is that what you do? So I've got a terrarium. How would I find them? Let's say I want to get my local one. So how would you find them? And then do you keep it? Is it like in a humidifier? I mean, what do they do? I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
a basic curiosity.
Yeah, I'd say probably as simple as you can go is just like a plastic box with some sticks and some paper towel on the bottom for some moisture, and some holes for ventilation. But I mean, you could do like a full nice like planetarium if you wanted for depending on what species it is.
Right.
Generally for mantises, the main thing I tell people is you kind of have to walk a little bit slow. I mean, these are really well camouflaged animals. And the other part of it too is they are watching you oftentimes before you ever notice them. And so they're going to try to adjust themselves to hide better depending on what they're sitting on. And they're one of the few insects that do that, which I think makes it really fun to collect
Right.
and try to look for them because you have to put yourself in their shoes, in their feet, tarsi, I guess, a little bit
Yeah.
to figure out what they're, where they might be. Like, um, generally, mantises are going to be hanging upside down on pretty much whatever plant or substrate they're on. And you'll find them at varying heights, but the best thing to do is to just really slowly scan the area that you're hoping to find them in because if you walk like a typical hiking or walking pace, it's quite difficult to notice them unless they're just on something a completely different background. But they typically prefer to hang out on
Yeah.
things that are similar in color, so that's likely not going to happen. But they're around. I'd say the best time to find them in general is going to be like August, September, late summer, early fall, in pretty much all over the country, and you will hopefully have some luck if you go to any kind of natural space that has a good amount of insects and stuff. So the main thing to look out for is insect diversity and natural plants and preserved areas, because without the two of those, mantises just cannot survive.
So I've got one. What am I feeding it? Bugs or something? What am I? How do you feed them?
Yeah, you can get like whatever kind of feeder insects you want from the pet store. You could go catch your own bugs to feed them from outside. They'll pretty much take pretty much all the species that most people will find typically will happily take any kind of insect that you give them. They're not really that picky. There are like a couple of the more specialized species like those unicorn mantises I was mentioning. Those are a bit more specialized for flying prey, but you could just catch any like thing that comes to your light at at near your house at night, and they'll probably eat it.
Right.
The main thing is it, especially for the adults, it needs to be large enough. They can't take something that's too tiny. But yeah, anything that's about a third of their size or bigger, they'll pretty much happily chow down on. And live prey. They don't really do dead things. They're not really scavengers. So.
Do they eat mosquitoes?
Yeah, the juveniles, the young nymphs, is what we call the babies. Yeah, they will happily eat mosquitoes quite frequently. They're about the right size for it. I'm sure they counter them all the time. And I mean, I fed them some in captivity, and there was no issues. So I'm sure they're eating a ton of them.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
Anything to get rid of mosquitoes, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah.
So, for everybody that's listening, how can they find out more information? I know you've got some social media and that. Let's talk about some of that stuff too. So, good resources, everything. I love your social media personally
Oh, thanks.
because I'm a fan. I'm following you. I'm following you personally and on the podcast. But for everybody else, kind of let's point everybody in some different directions.
Yeah. So in addition to my page, which is Mantodiology on Instagram, there's another great page called Mondo del Mantidi. Is a Italian colleague of mine who does basically like quick summaries of new research articles that have come out in the mantis world, sort of highlighting the interesting things that are going on. Unfortunately, outside of that, there's not like a big centralized resource that is generally accessible for the public. There are a lot of more local information guides, but unfortunately, a lot of the ones that I've looked at, they're either outdated or there's a lot of misidentified species on there. So I would just be a little bit cautious, but there are a lot of groups on the internet if folks are interested in learning about mantises. Like there's like praying mantis community. There's a Facebook group, or
And for you guys listening, I'll have all this in the description too. If you're listening now, it'll be in the description what we're going through now. Does the museum have anything on their website at all about them or not?
I mean, I have like a little short blurb about my research
Yeah.
interests on the museum page, but I don't think there's a specialized page for mantises in particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
So while you're doing that, I'm going to, and you can interrupt me when you pull that up. I'm going to tell everybody we're at that time of telling a joke, and if you get that ahead of time before the joke, you'll probably save your day. But as I tell everybody that's listening now, while we're pulling up this thing, is, we all know if you've listened before how great these jokes are or how not great they are, and oftentimes I can talk guest, and he was smart enough not to have to tell one. But as I always tell everybody, if you've got nieces, nephews, grandkids, if you want to be on the show, whoever, I gladly have on. If you listened before, I have people on all the time. You can email me at mkyleforrealpodcast.com, or if you have got a great idea. But did you get your website out? And we're going to do the joke, but trust me, guys, I really want you to send in so we don't have to tell the joke.
I'm excited for this joke.
So I have one specifically for you, and it's as funny as I warned you.
All right, all right.
Why don't mantis ever lose arguments?
I think I know the answer, but I'll would you like to hear my guess? I don't want to spoil the joke.
I want to hear your guess. And if it's good, I'd rather you have it.
All right. I'm gonna guess that it's because they don't lose they don't lose their head, but I guess it's they do lose their head.
That's pretty close. They always get the last bite.
Oh, yeah.
Same idea.
That's good. Yeah.
Well, as good as it can get. Let's just say that.
Yes.
So anyways, first off, thanks for so much for being on the show. This is fun. As I told you, I'm serious. I've had to do a lot of episodes this week for recording, and this is the one I've been really looking forward to.
Yeah.
That whole part of the guy sneaking up behind her to mate because he didn't get his head bit off. I find humor out of it. I think it's the funniest thing ever. That's funny in a weird way.
Better safe than sorry.
Exactly. But really, seriously, thanks for taking the time to be on. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
And then lastly, for everybody else that's listening, as I always say, be really kind to animals. And also, if you're giving animals treats, you're a treat dealer. And really, 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 from the bottom of my heart, thanks so much for listening. For real.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.